Hi,
Wow.
how are
Every
you?
every time it works, I'm amazed.
I know. It's a whole new world, this
It's
technology.
a whole new world, and you are, and you know this world
Yes.
inside and out. So we're very lucky to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I've been watching your very interesting interviews.
Thank
It really is interesting. Like, obviously you know that everybody has a story, but to
you.
hear it firsthand is always it's always much more meaningful.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we were trying to do with the Interiors Academy is really let people tell their own stories. So we're excited about yours, and I think we should get started.
Sure.
We're going to, it's a great day, really, because we had no Wi-Fi in the morning. Now we have Wi-Fi. It's a whole new world. Um, so welcome, everyone, to Interiors Academy. I'm so delighted to have Ippolita Rostagno here, an Italian artist and designer. You're based in New York, in Brooklyn. And you're best known perhaps for your eponymous jewelry brand, which was founded about 20 years ago.
Yep.
And about 5 years ago, Ippolita took a new turn and founded Artemest, which is an e-commerce platform designed to bring Italian craft to a wide audience in a new way. So, and as founder and creative director, Ippolita has shaped every aspect of the business and will tell us all about that. So let's start. I wanted to say first, it seems you've had many lives, or just perhaps one that's incredibly layered. And so I wanted to know what's the thread and what brought you to the place where you now find yourself.
Well, I was born in Italy, and I was born in Florence, which is a very craft-centric town, and not only craft-centric, but also historically, the idea of philanthropy around the arts is very ingrained in the culture, and because it still has such a broad craft base, it's really like a living history. So you don't really feel like it was once that way and it's gone away. You know, it's still very relevant. So I grew up there, but as the world, and then in my 20s I came to the States, and I've been here ever since, but have been going, of course, back and forth. And I studied sculpture, so my craft background is in sculpture. And then I started making jewelry when I was here in the States. And so I thought initially, well, why am I setting up shop here? Maybe I should go back to Italy and set up shop over there, and then just sell here. But then that turned out to be too complicated, and so therefore I started my jewelry shop over here. But in the interim of going back and forth all these years, I was becoming aware of the fact that all the artisans were closing.
Yeah.
And the part of they were mostly concentrated in a part of town called Oltrarno. And so when they started to close, it became very visible, because, or rather, they became invisible. And and it's gradual. It happens gradually, but of course, it happened over a 30-year period, which is very short relative to the hundreds of years they'd been there. So, at the beginning, I was very upset, simply because they're part of the fabric of the culture, in a way that's different from other places. And certainly, like, for example, here, where they are much, this is a younger country. So design sort of lives at a higher strata of the culture, in design and in a maker culture, but that's not really rooted in community and family and the organization of society. So to me, when I felt like all of these artisans were disappearing, I really felt like it was one and the same, with kind of like a cultural disintegration. We're going to lose certain things about the culture that are not going to be replaceable. And it's not just, it's just not sort of a segment of the economy. It's not just, oh, okay, well, we lost a certain segment of small mom and pop businesses. You know, it was really sort of, you're losing know-how, you're losing culture, you're losing art, you're losing even the idea of transmission of taste and culture and trade and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the reasons that this was happening, you can stop me and you can,
No,
if
keep
I'm
going.
going
It's
on and
very
on.
interesting how it's so embedded in the culture, and that is really a huge part of the value of
Yeah.
of craft in Italy and then throughout the world. So keep going. I'll stop you when it's
Okay. So basically, one of the reasons that this was happening is because the internet happened.
Mm-hmm.
And people stopped traveling, and the buying offices started to close, and so the artisans that had relied very heavily since the Second World War on people coming to them and looking for them and sort of helping them figure out what exactly the market needed. So they never really developed that skill for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when the internet happened, and all of these offices closed and people stopped traveling, and then obviously there are complicated things. There were shifts in the economics of buying and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
These people were kind of left to their own devices, and they kind of woke up one day and said, where is everybody? And they realized, or they didn't even realize, but they didn't have enough know-how in-house
Mm-hmm.
to reach out to the world from their own little shop.
So you brought that know-how to them then.
Right, exactly. So that was very clear to me because I grew up there, and I know these people, and I know how distant they are, especially the makers themselves, how distant they are from the internet. And therefore, I wanted to create a channel that not only facilitated access, but that was really a lifeline for them in terms of really substituting what had been the traditional economic channels for them.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of an ironic thing because it's the internet sort of killed them and then is now bringing them back. Is now saving
Yeah.
them. Is there anything else like Artemest on the market or on the internet as?
Well, I would say no, because we are, first of all, entirely focused on Italy. And there's a reason, when I started, I thought, well, I'm doing this because for me, it's a mission. This is my people, my culture. And, eventually we might extend this to other countries. But the density in Italy is so unique. And also, I must say that the more we've built a relationship directly with the artisans and extended it to designers and small, companies, I realized that, there's no reason kind of to go elsewhere right now. And so when we started, of course, there were other platforms that traded in vintage.
Mm-hmm.
And, and this was, and at the beginning I was like, I wish there was somebody that I could just hand this project to, because this was not my core business at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was a jewelry designer and with a mission. But of course, there was none at the time. And so I had to build it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because what other platforms did for antiques, we needed to do for the living.
Mm-hmm. So I think explain a little how it works, and I'll encourage everyone to go to artemest.com and check it out, because once you do go there, by the way, it's a total rabbit hole. You'll never get out. You just keep digging and digging and digging and finding the most wonderful things. And so basically it's set up very easily for shopping. Can you talk a little bit about how it's set up, how it evolves, and how you profile the makers on the site, as well as simply sort of putting their goods out there?
Right. I mean, for me, it was very important. I mean, one of the central ideas is that the craftsman is at the center of his universe, certainly, and that you need to know him. Because if you, and you, mostly you also need to see, if at all possible, the modality and the craft at work, because then you really truly understand. It's hard to it's hard to understand the relationship of value if you don't understand the process around it, and where it comes from, and what the motivation was. And in large part, these people are like artists. The one thing that I totally understand, but it still makes me smile all the time, is that every single one starts with, it comes from passion. It's a passion. Like there's no economic motivator, in what they do, because in some ways they can never charge for actually what they do, since anything that's made by hand is incredibly time consuming, not only, but takes 20 years to learn. So you can't really amortize the cost of all of that work and all of that creativity and all of that knowledge into an object. So therefore, I felt that it was important to actually have the pictures of the shop, videos of the craft, so that you understood the very unique motivation of all these different artisans.
And I think it's interesting too, because one of the things that's striking about it is that you have people who have this incredible depth of experience and knowledge, but there's a youthfulness to the work. And also you have quite a lot of young people. Everyone's not sort of like grizzled and gray and,
Yes.
And
it's very interesting. And I think that, in some ways we are seeing a little bit of I don't want to say a renaissance, maybe that's too big a term, but we do definitely see younger people gravitating towards what used to be considered sort of old school crafts. More from the design perspective than maybe from the maker perspective. A lot of designers are working in tandem, but of course you want to work with the best ones, and so therefore you necessarily gain a very fine instinct around the maker process.
Is there anything, I mean, there's a great range of things on the site. Is there anything that's not your taste per se? Is what draws you to particular artisans and having them on the site?
So that's an interesting question, because at the beginning I chose absolutely every single thing. Like I vetted it, because part of the idea is the curation is very, very rigorous, because it needs to have a cohesive point of view. And one of the things about these artisans is that they will make lots of things, but not necessarily themselves are capable of editing their assortments. And so you have to edit it for them, and you have to make sure that their story comes across. So at the beginning, I was editing everybody's assortments, and the result was that it was a little too narrow. The point of view was too narrow. And then ultimately we created a team in-house that reviewed all of the assortments. And and at the beginning I was like, oh, don't put that on, and then we'd sell it the next day. And then you're like, oh, okay, I guess I have to loosen up a little bit. You can't be you can't go to the extreme of saying, well, somebody will like it, even if you don't like it. But at the same time, the criteria have to be, there are obviously certain basic criteria. It has to be beautifully made. That's sort of criteria number one. And it has to be a delightful surprise when you receive something that it's better than you thought.
Yeah, it's really, it's interesting, the question of sort of expanding your own taste. And the more you do it, the more you're like, well, actually, there's something very interesting in that, in that thing I didn't think I liked, which
right.
I always
find. And I have to say, I encourage everyone to actually go through and look at the alternate views, because sometimes you don't understand. You're looking at a little image like this and you don't understand that it's 20 feet tall, and so you really have to take the time to, to really look at all the pictures.
And one of the other things that you've introduced is customization more,
Yes.
right?
Well, customization
Mm-hmm.
is, it's kind of a funny concept because everything is made by hand. So if you have to make it a little bigger, a little smaller, or a different color, it kind of doesn't really influence the production time. And this is one of the things about Italian craftsmen that are so genius, that, they'll always say yes. Can you completely change this and make it into something different, of a completely different color and size? Yes. So it's very, very satisfying because you can look at the site. Of course, you can purchase the items, but you can also look at it from the point of view of being a reference catalog and say, oh, I need something like that. I'm sure that person, if they can do this, they can also do something that I'm thinking about.
Oh, that's a great tool for designers then.
Yes, yes. And in fact, our trade,
Mm-hmm.
designers, interior decorators, architects, they're understanding what they're looking at, obviously more so than the layperson, and therefore they take advantage of it more.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One of the things that interests me about what you do also is sort of this flipping back and forth between the virtual world and the physical world. And that's basically the kind of crux of the whole project, is sort of bringing the physical world out. But one of the things was, I think it was only last year in Milan, you did the incredible house.
Yes.
Was it 2 years ago? My time frame.
I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year. This year is this is the year we're skipping.
Craft.
Yes.
So we want to talk about the house and then the virtual craft week that you just created.
Yeah. So as you know, for the last 3 months, the world has been locked into a virtual, cage, and eventually you do start to suffer. Meaning you do need to eat at a restaurant, touch something, look at something beautiful in the flesh, and therefore, that in some ways brought to the fore sort of an ongoing problem of always, which is, you don't truly appreciate something unless you're seeing it in real life. And many of the people who you've interviewed have said over and over, oh, I used to love to go to, Brimfield or antiquing here or there. And I used to love that too. And when I started Artemest, I literally spent a year going door to door from north to south, knocking on people's doors and seeing what they were doing. And you can't substitute that experience, with, and then I brought them all online, but it's, like in my mind, I have one kind of reference and resonance. And we try very much through our curation and through our storytelling to communicate how beautiful all those things are, and to connect them to the territory, because that's another important thing. Like all the crafts are very specific to a territory. Mm-hmm. So that's why it was important for me to not just go to, Venice and Florence, and the places that everybody associates with artistic craft, but also, the little towns all over the South and in Sicily and all over the North, because they're really very, very different, because the culture of the regions are so different, and the materials. So, in the North they have porcelain, and in the South they have, ceramic ware. And there's a reason for that, because the clay is different, so when you're saying, oh, I don't like that kind of workmanship because it's, maybe bigger and fatter and heavier, that's because the makeup of the clay won't allow you to do anything thinner, or it'll break. And if you know these things, it makes it a much more interesting journey, through the craft types.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you bring that forward in the editorial on the site to some extent. Like there's a whole story about Sardinian craft, which I'm obsessed with, And I thought that was really wonderful because those, what happens there, and each one really sort of reflects, because I mean, until recently, Italy was not one country, right?
Yes.
So you really have a lot of kind of regional know-how.
Well, it's still, we have 20 regions, and still, so I grew up in Florence, and Dante is from Florence. So the Florentine all think that Florence is the end all be all. And, if you're Florentine, that's the real Italian.
Mm-hmm.
But even
Sorry,
so.
my dog is knocking over.
Okay. That's okay.
Sorry.
Well, I'll continue talking.
You continue, and I'll be right back.
Okay. So even so, north of Rome is kind of the dividing line. So north of Rome, everybody understands each other. And then once you start going south, you understand less and less. And, I can understand maybe, up to Naples, but I don't understand Neapolitan. So, then it's, when you say it's a different region, it's really a different language, a different culture. It's not just a cadence. It's a real dialect.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's quite amazing, not to mention the fact that Italy wasn't even unified till 1860. So,
Okay. That is, I think it's very interesting, and you sort of see that emerging. I think one of my questions is, what has surprised you most in developing Artemest?
I think just the wild variety of things that are out there, and how flexible I think that these artisans have been in incorporating guidance and more contemporary taste. Because they're, being an artisan is extremely, it's a certain kind of person that becomes an artisan. It's a certain kind of person that can close themselves in a room for 20 hours a day, for 20 years and make something. And so they're usually, hard-headed, or, you always think, oh, they're so charming because they're so, unique and mercurial. But that's because they've made this radical choice. And so a lot of times you think, well, it's not going to be easy for them to evolve, for them to evolve their taste, and, because, you'll say, well, can't you do it this way instead of that way? Because, you've been exposed to more options for construction or something. And they'll say, no, I can't do that. And then you'll go back the next day and they say, oh, I was up all night and I figured it out, and and I did it. And that flexibility, I think, was surprising, because we were able to update the sort of the catalog of products that they make to reflect a more contemporary aesthetic.
And as they evolve, do you also sort of see the world evolving to accept that craft again more? Do you see a renewed interest in their work?
I would say yes, because I think that there's a reason that customization has kind of gone crazy as a fad. Like, you can customize your sneakers, you can customize your t-shirts, you can customize anything, because people are getting tired of ready-mades. Yes, okay, there's a place for a Gap t-shirt, but you can't just have Gap t-shirts in every aspect of your life. So as more people, and of course the information, the internet has provided us with access to so much information and so much sort of insight into other ways of living and other cultures and other aesthetics, that you wouldn't necessarily have known about, if you lived in a previous time. That I think that on the whole, people's taste is more educated. And so therefore, I think also you have a much broader audience for understanding, not only craft, but also beauty.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the questions we've been asking is sort of how our relationship with our home space has changed over the last few months. But I think one of the things you're talking about is how our relationship with home and design has actually changed over the past few years, since we have
Yes.
access to more things in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm always struggling I'm a craft person myself,
Mhm.
and I've been designing jewelry for 25 years in a very, very sort of focused manner. And there are some things that are instinctual that you bring to your work, and some things that you can improvise, but you can't improvise everything.
Mhm.
And therefore, home decor, I feel, is the same way, and craft certainly, I feel, has a commonality across disciplines, across trades, that elevating the quality of all the things that surround you. And I feel this way about jewelry for sure, but I feel that way about the home space too. It's like if you surround yourself with beauty, you have a much more elevated experience in your everyday life. And I think that this idea has filtered down, through even people, through society in general, not necessarily only through the design community.
Mhm.
And so therefore, like you were saying, I don't think it's a trend of the last 3 months. I think that this is simply something that has been evolving and crystallizing over the past several years as we've gained more access to, just to images and different ways of looking of your living environment all over the world, all over the globe.
Mhm. That's interesting. So, um, I was going to ask, I guess, what's next for you, really, in this at Artemest, personally, the kind of work you're doing? Um,
Well, I mean, for Artemis, my ambition is to make it as well known as possible. Like, it would be absolutely wonderful because as we were saying earlier, one of the original intents was to attract younger people to these trades.
mhm.
Like, one of the sort of aspects of the mission part was to make sure that there were enough young people learning directly from the masters so that the know-how had a channel to continue on into the future. And if enough people do that, and you provide a framework that makes it economically viable, then you can reboot the entire economy based on our strengths, which are, the Italian strengths, which are creativity and, and maker culture generally, and craft. And to me, that was like it's a big goal, clearly, but it's a goal that I really, think you can't, we have to stop thinking that the world is flat and we can compete on everything, because we can't, like, they can't compete on, making it faster, cheaper, so you have to compete in making it more beautiful, more special, being able to, share the passion and the history and communicate, how these things actually are connected to a past and not just, made today for tomorrow out of, thin air. And so that's my big ambition, is to really make sure that this message gets communicated together with the commercial message, and that it inspires both younger people there and elsewhere to kind of realize that these are viable life choices, so that's the big idea.
Well, I think that's a wonderful big idea, and that we all have to do is sort of continue to promote the idea. I love the idea of an economy and culture that really values creativity and and things made well, things that you spend time on, things that you spend time with. And I think that's one of the things that we all really want to promote, encourage, and support. And I hope also, I think there's sort of this idea about trickling down. I also hope it will then trickle up, at least, you know, because I think that we need larger structures that really value time, effort, creativity, and not sort of the fast.
Yeah.
The fast.
No, and I think that really, you know, it's obviously it's a complicated thing, but you know, you would like there to be sort of an official government sort of acknowledgement that these things matter, not just because they're a swath of the economy, but because they're pillars of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that once you sort of agree to let go of these ideas, things will disintegrate. You know, like if they don't have advocacy, they'll disintegrate. And so I think that it's very important for everybody to advocate, not just around your community, but in all ways.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for that. I think that is a very inspiring note on which to end and leave people with the idea that we should go out, advocate, support, and delight in beautiful things.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sabine. Okay, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So go to artemest.com, and if you want to see this or tell your friends to see this later, interiorsacademy.com. But go shopping, go digging, go reading, and learn about all these wonderful artisans that Ippolita is supporting.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.